Our next project is going to be called Pattern Landscapes. We're going to draw different landscapes and then color them, and inside each space of the landscape, you're going to add patterns. This is going to be inspired by the beautiful landscapes of the artist Robin Mead. Robin Mead uses lots of bright, beautiful colors and patterns in her landscapes. Here are a few examples. One thing that usually Robin puts in her work are suns, sunsets, and sunrises. Here is a great example of how Robin is using patterns to fill in the shapes and spaces in her landscape. A landscape is a picture or a work of art that shows the land outside or the world outside. Landscapes can show lots of different things in the world. They could show mountains and forests. They could show mountains, trees, and beautiful fields of flowers. They can show deserts with red rocks and rolling clouds and bushes all over the place. A landscape could even be a water landscape where the water is in the foreground, the mountains are in the middle, and in the background. The possibilities are really endless. Use your imagination when you think of your own landscape for this project. Okay, so I want to refresh your memory on the 3 parts of a landscape. A landscape has 3 parts: the foreground, the middle ground, and the background. The foreground shows everything that's in the front. Fore is another word for front. Fore and before comes first. The things that are in the foreground come first, and they are usually at the bottom of the landscape picture. The middle ground is everything that's in the middle. Okay, so anything that's in this middle area in between the foreground and the background. That's why it's called the middle ground, because it's in the middle. The background is anything that is all the way in the back, the distance, things that are farthest away. Now that's important because the foreground, middle ground, and background, each object that's in the foreground, middle ground, and background is going to be a different size. Things that are in the foreground are usually much bigger because they are closer to the viewer. Things that are in the middle ground are going to be a little bit smaller, and then things that are in the background are going to be really, really small because they are farther away. So make sure you keep that in mind when you're drawing your details. Anything that's in the foreground is going to be bigger, anything that's in the middle ground is going to be medium-sized, and then anything that's in the background is going to be much smaller. So here is my example of my Robin Mead inspired pattern landscape, and you can see that the water down here is what's in the foreground. The middle ground is these trees and these rolling hills, and then the background are the mountains and the sun. Let's look at another example. Okay, raise your hand if you can tell me which part is the foreground, which part is the middle ground, and which part is the background. Here's another example that's not quite finished, but it's still, we can see the foreground, middle ground, and background. Again, background are things that are in the distance, the mountains and the clouds. The middle ground is everything that's in the middle, so right here. And then the foreground is everything that's at the bottom and towards the front, which is right down here. Okay, so keep all of those things in mind when you're drawing your landscape. So I'm going to start with some hills in the foreground, some rolling hills. I'm drawing with pencil first. Okay, so there's my foreground. Now what I'm going to do is in the middle ground, I'm going to add some, how about just a flat line. That way I could make that water or I could make it grass. I haven't quite decided yet. And in the background, I'm going to do some mountains. I'm overlapping my mountains. Overlapping means one is in front of the other. Okay, so there's my basic landscape. Now what I'm going to do is start adding in those patterns, okay, because Robin Mead uses a lot of patterns and our artwork is going to be inspired by her beautiful pattern landscapes. So think about your patterns. Okay, so I just want to talk about my pattern choices. So I decided to make some triangle patterns, some little spiky patterns down here in the hills to kind of symbolize grass. Over here in the water, I decided to make this water, and I used swirls to symbolize the swirling ripples and the way the water moves. Like, let's say this was a river, let's say it was moving and swirling. And then the mountains, I decided to do crisscross because I think these look kind of like rocks, the way the pattern, the grid pattern is. And then I did decide to add a sun. Now the next step is going to be to use a Sharpie to outline everything. Next, use markers to outline again right beside the Sharpie. Use colors that you think match the area of your landscape. So for example, the blue, I'm going to use blue to outline the water. I'm going to use 2 different greens to outline the grass and the hills. I'm going to use brown to outline the mountains, and then I'm going to use yellow and red, or yellow and orange to outline the sun. Okay, the final step is to use crayons to color everything else. There should be 0 white spaces left when you are done. Make sure that you take your time, go nice and slow, and I can't wait to see them when they're finished.